Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons, your favorite tabletop role-playing game news, podcast, stream, game design, talky talk stuff. We are in that special time between Christmas and New Year. I am Shawn Merwin, here with the gift giving and gift receiving Teos Abadia. Hey, Teos.
Hey Shawn, how's it going? I mean, I hope that like me, you are, just consuming as much peppermint bark as you can. And
I have had my share of peppermint bark. I will admit, mine is not a big bar. It is the smaller ones. But yes, if you eat 27 smaller ones, it's almost like you're eating a large bar.
I heard that that's the way that it works. Yeah. Yep. Also, if you cease all exercise, I found that's perfect for the holidays. That's
Works wonderful.
just
Wonderful
roll
for me.
around the room is what I'm doing these days.
Yeah. So I got a few gifts. I got a PlayStation 5, so maybe now I will be able to play Baldur's Gate 3.
Oh
That was
yeah,
my New Year's resolution was
super
to
cool.
actually play 5 minutes of Baldur's Gate 3. Uh, but the big hit so far has been a fishing themed card game called Lure.
Oh, very
Uh,
nice.
it's one of those super simple games, but just enough complexity that it's a little challenging, and then there's lots of luck involved. So
Mm-hmm.
fun game introduced to me by a former student of mine, as well as a RPG designer now, Jackson,
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
lots of fun. Did you
Yeah,
get
I'd have to check
anything
that.
anything of note?
I did. I did. One big thing, since I'm now the main cook in my family, I got a kind of speaker system that can go in, that goes in, is now in the kitchen. And I tried it out yesterday as I made food, and it was just awesome. My
Mhm.
daughter and I were jamming. Kids are still here. So that's super fun. They're the big gift. Also, I got a like Dwarven Forge often has these like sets of like many things, and it's a lot of money to own that entire set. But they periodically sell little pieces on their website, and I sent a link to my wife just in case, and she delivered. Which I got this nice little like it's a small ship, like a little like just big enough for the party to go on kind of thing.
Mhm.
And that's it's really great quality. It has a little glow in the dark light at the front and stuff. That's great. So I'm super excited about that. And then the thing that I've been doing for myself is building a Daggerheart Fear Tracker, which is also going to be a gift
Mm,
to my Daggerheart DM.
nice.
And that's a lot of fun as I sort of figure this project out and slowly apply more layers of stain and more and more and more.
Cool. The last thing, my daughter gifted my wife and I a trip to the National Comedy Center. Uh, it is in, of all places, Jamestown, New York, which is about 30 miles away,
Hmm.
the home town of one Lucille Ball, if you are
Yeah,
familiar
sure.
with old time comedy. So they had a museum for her, and they worked together to create this National Comedy Center. And it's been there for 7 or so years, and it's only 30 miles away. I've passed it several times, but we've never gone. So my daughter went. She said, Dad, I think you'd like this. So we went. It was awesome. It was sort
That's
of like
great.
a comedy hall of fame. And so lots of displays, lots of super interactive things. When you go in, you get a wristband that is radio frequency related,
Uh
and you
huh.
type in what you like in comedy.
Oh wow.
And so as you go through, you'll scan your wristband, and then it will show you something
Huh.
that it thinks you will like. And if you're with other people, it will see what everyone likes and try to come up with displays or shows or
Yeah.
whatever to to please everyone, that everyone
Oh,
would
I love that.
and then artifacts, old
Hmm.
scripts from from the 20s and 30s, radio, and then television, film, internet. Just wonderful. So if you're ever, I mean, I don't know why you would be in the Jamestown, New York area, but if you ever are, and if you're a fan of comedy, I would strongly suggest going
Wow.
to the National Comedy Center there.
I love it. That sounds awesome.
Yep. And not so funny though are our listeners when they're serious. Now, if they're trying to be funny, they're hilarious.
Yeah.
And so we like to talk with our listeners of various through various channels,
Mm.
and we're going to take a couple of questions right now. These questions for today come from our discussion last time about the DMs Guild. So they're going to have that sort of focus. First one is Math Guy Dave via our Patreon Discord. Did crowdfunding replace the DMs Guild to a large degree? I'm going to give a short answer. I'm going to let Teos give the long answer. Replace, no. Overshadow, a bit. Uh, it's important to remember that, like we talked about previously, the DMs Guild is not a great place for publishers unless you're using Wizards of the Coast IP.
Mm.
So comparing those two things are comparing apples to oranges. But it is definitely a shift of where the audience's eyes are.
Mhm.
Because at one point, a lot of the audience's eyes were on the DMs Guild for not just IP related stuff, but for anything.
Yeah.
Then the audience, what always happens, shifts and they find a new medium, a new site, a new venue where they all congregate or congregate more. And I think that's more what's happened here.
Yeah, I agree exactly with what you said. That little piece that you put in that's really important, which is that for a while, it sort of didn't matter what kind of product you made on the DMs Guild. That was the place the audience was attuned to and rewarded your placing a product there with sales. And so, when I worked with Eric Mengi on Jungle Treks, yes, we wanted something that was themed off of Tomb of Annihilation. And so that was there, but we could have published on drive-through and said, hey, here's a bunch of Jungle Treks, same name.
Mm-hmm.
We're not telling you it's Forgotten Realms. We're not telling you it's Tomb of Annihilation, but of course you can add a Tomb of Annihilation. And we could have done that, but there was just such a great crowd on the DMs Guild that it made sense. As time has passed and that audience has been in many different places and not so hot for everything DMs Guild, or there are so many products that you're not going to actually stand out and be guaranteed that audience or have a better chance at it, then that's where you try all these other factors come into play. And the biggest thing with crowdfunding is not only is it a platform where you can launch your product, but it's a platform that you can keep coming back to, right? So I can crowdfund product A, and then when I crowdfund product B, I can include A as an add-on, right? That's huge.
Right.
And I can keep doing that. I can have it on my web store. I can have it at all these different places. And being able to do all that is what creates far larger sales for many creators, not all. There are some folks who have managed to establish an audience on the guild and retain it and stay there. An example of that is Jeff Stevens. He releases a lot of amazing guild products, and he's known for doing that. He's got his newsletter, all these different things. And so people know, hey, if I'm on the DMs Guild and I see Jeff Stevens, I should probably pick this up. It's probably really good. And it is. Every single thing that you open of his is really good. Now, he does also do some other products elsewhere, right? Empty Black, on the other hand, really moved it entirely out of the guild and to crowdfunding. And he's on drive-through, of course, but a different model. So it depends on the creators. Most creators see that value in taking your audience with you and being able to sell repeatedly and in any number of places.
One thing that I'm going to come back to when we talk about our main topic, which is the looking at the DMs Guild and into the future, it's marketing, right?
Yeah.
Where you put your thing is not just the site, that the marketplace, it's the marketing. And so, they say the medium is the message. In this place, the medium is the marketing. And so if a lot of eyes are one place, you go there, and then if those eyes move, you go elsewhere.
Yeah.
But we can look at folks who started on the guild and then went to Patreon. They started on the guild and then went to drive-through. They started on the guild and then they went not just Kickstarter, not even just crowdfunding, but when you're on the DMs Guild, what's one thing that you're not allowed to do? And that's get the email addresses of the people that bought your stuff.
Yeah.
If you're on the DMs Guild, if you're on drive-through, you can. Yeah. If you're on Kickstarter, you definitely can. If you're doing a Patreon, you already have that information.
Yeah.
So Right. That's huge. Being
Huge.
able to send a message to that list
Yeah.
marketing wise.
Yeah, absolutely. Huge. And we'll talk more about that in our main segment for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, second question is from Andrew Pashinsky via our Patreon Discord. Given that oversaturation was likely or the major factor in the decline of the DMs Guild, do you think there was any stopping it, any stopping that decline? Um, the amount of hands-on curation and moderation it would have needed seems like it would be complex and overwhelming to manage. And that's before the AI slop even became an issue. So, great question, Andrew. Yeah, there is no way to stop the decline of anything, be it organic entities like us, machines, or social constructs.
Yeah.
Right?
Well
Things can
said.
happen.
Ooh, put that on a
Things can
shirt.
happen. Yeah, happy new year. Things can happen to accelerate or decelerate the rate of decay, but the end is inevitable. So,
Mhm.
as you say, Andrew, curation and moderation would have been one way to delay the inevitable. But even then, it also might have sped it up. Because what does curation and moderation entail? It entails a lot of time, a lot of expense, and by its very nature, moderation and curation uh, is sort of a limitation on the egalitarian nature of what the internet and the market want. So as soon as OBS or Wizards or whoever started that curation and moderation, the system that they put in place, whether it's right or wrong, would be called into question. So why was that adventure given this status instead and mine wasn't? Why was she a starred creator when I'm not? Why did they pick those people for the Gilded Debt program and not for me? Right?
Mhm.
We already talked about it last week. There was this process of curation, moderation, enhancement, whatever you want to call it, and that was considered one of the downfalls of the
Mhm.
guild
Mhm.
by some. So as soon as you try to force anything that could be challenged in any way, you may in fact be enhancing the downfall of the thing.
Yeah, and I want to answer this by going to another piece that Andrew was talking about on our Discord, which is the convention CCC program. And to me, this is a great example of what happens when you just open up the floodgate and find out how that works, right? So conventions were allowed at one point to create their own AL adventures. This is before the Dungeon Craft program existed, though we saw similar results of the Dungeon Craft program. What happened was you had, something like, I don't know, 13 Adventures League adventures for a season that would slowly come out. So you can see how demand is high because supply is low and there's high interest. And so suddenly saying to conventions, hey, you can create your own programs. Now, they don't add directly into that storyline, but you can sort of write your own little areas, your own self-existing trilogy or whatever of adventures, and then people can play those and buy them on the DMs Guild. And at the very, very beginning, there was interest in that and sales for that. I think Andrew says it took 4 to 5 years to sell 100 copies of a convention adventure, and that many never could reach even the 50 sales it requires to be copper status. And the reason was the floodgates opened so quickly that no matter what customer you were, if you looked at this overwhelming amount of sudden convention material with nothing to tell you whether it was any good or not, the most logical answer is just back away. Slowly, quietly back away from the computer screen. Do not buy anything, because you just couldn't possibly buy them all, and you couldn't tell what was good. And notoriously, people just, through hearsay, do not tell you which adventure you really want, right? It takes a lot of information to pull together what are really great adventures. Just one person on a forum, that's not enough. And so there just isn't enough play of them. There are too many of them, and it just tanked. And Dungeon Craft has been the same way, right? It's a fine way to force yourself to create something and just say, look, I made a thing. But very few sales are going to come of it because just there are too many and there's no way to do that. And I think that's sort of shows the opposite side of what will not work and why you need to have some sort of way to evaluate to reach your audience, to reach the intended audience, right? The part of the audience that should see this and should look at it. If you're not doing that, you'll just overwhelm everybody.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love. I could do a whole show, I think, on this idea of, convention created content, user created content for organized play, because there's a time and a place for it. And the time and the place for it is in a campaign where there is limited content, but much more interest in the campaign and much more interest in play than um, than the official program can keep up with. We did it for uh, the Eberron Oracle of War campaign because we knew that this is going to be one adventure per level.
Mm-hmm.
And there are going to be people out there that don't want that. They want more. And so what we did was the salvage system and salvage adventures, where you want to run for your home group and you want more than one adventure per level, run these. Here's the limited amount of reward you can get. Here's how you handle leveling if you do this. And it works really, really well.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it done over the years, and I'm trying to go back to where it started. And I want to say Mark of Heroes way back when. But I'm not sure if that's where it started. But I know we did it for Zendrick Expeditions. I know that we did it for Living Forgotten Realms as time went on. Because I created the My Realms adventures where you got to write your own. And yeah, so it's an interesting concept, and it does go to this idea of marketing, of demand, of what's needed versus what's not, what's too much versus too little. And it can be done, but the CCT program definitely was sort of, for me, that was the end of not just creating content, but it was the end of the Adventurers League.
Which is a long time ago. But I agree with you. When I saw the way that Firehose was set up, and also the way the relationships existed between convention people and administrators, and the possibility for bad incentives, right? Because there was this kind of thing of like, admins had to actually bless a convention as you get to do this. And that created, fortunately we have pretty good admins, but like the it's ripe for corruption, problematic stuff. And there were some low level things where it was like, a convention would invite an AL admin out to be there, all expenses paid. Oh, hey, can we also get our conventions approved for a CCC program? And, fortunately there was so little money in it that there wasn't a lot to be exploited there. But had the CCC adventures been making adamantine, that would have been a major problem, right? And then we go back to what I said about Andrew's thing, right? Where everything is going to be looked at. And the thing is, companies can take several cycles before they realize these problems, if they ever do. Dungeon Craft is still an active program, and I guess sure, it's fine that people can create something. But it comes with this illusion of success that's just not at all there. It's not only not guaranteed, it's just not there for anybody. Like, no one's making, I haven't heard of anybody who said, man, my Dungeon Craft thing, like, now my power bill's covered, every month. Like, no, like, that's not, so.
True.
But more on that later.
More on that later. We have some great questions for next time in the new year. But we are going to now jump into our news and commentary section, starting with a pair of new D&D books from Penguin Random House, of all places. Teos,
I thought you were going to tell me that D&D had announced a bunch of new things, but no.
Yeah, so tell me what they did announce.
They announced the Dungeon Master's Workbook and Player's Workbook of Epic Adventures. And these will come out in May of next year. They are being called Official Companion Workbooks, which is interesting wording. I guess that's through the licensing agreement. Penguin Random House is interesting because, they used to distribute all D&D things. And now that they don't, they make licensed works to then distribute instead of distributing the actual official D&D books. It's interesting. So these two quasi-official licensed companion workbooks are kind of like what you would think of as a DMG2 or a how-to player's handbook auxiliary kind of product. The DM's workbook is designed as a storytelling tool that can help DMs build campaigns, teaches the basics of map making for fantasy worlds, offers advice on role-playing as a DM, gives DMs ideas for crafting magic items, has compelling story hooks for over 25 scenarios, and it's $26, pretty cheap. The player's handbook player's workbook is an interactive workbook that guides players through the basics of D&D 5e through writing and brainstorming exercises, helps players choose classes and subclasses, craft their origin story, also provides room for adventure planning, and helps players plan out their character's advancement as they level up. $25. What do you think, Shawn?
It is very interesting, especially given the fact that, as you said, there was a deal where Random House and Penguin were distributing Wizards books. That got canceled. And we thought, well, we'll never see that again. And this goes back to the conversation we were just having about official, semi-official, first party, third party, second party. And my first thought is cool. My second thought is this any good? And does it help the audience that would want it? That is always my fear because I go to Barnes and Noble, right? And I walk around and I go to the RPG section and I see many things with RPG and I see many things with D&D and I see them in the same display. Some of them are official Wizards of the Coast books. Some of them are definitely not D&D sanctioned at all. They're just RPG books. And then some of them say D&D, but they're not Wizards, so they had to have been licensed. And they're all mixed together on the same display. And so if I'm a new player, I walk up and I am just overwhelmed. Do I buy the player's handbook or the player's workbook? How are they related? Can I do one without the other? Do I need them both? If I only buy the player's workbook, what am I going to do? Did I just waste $25 because I still need to go buy the player's handbook? So it's nothing against the product itself. It's just looking at, from the Wizards of the Coast side of things, how do you want to have your game presented to people that may not know?
Yeah,
in places like game stores and bookstores and the big box stores.
Yeah, it is really interesting. I as you know, I love walking into a game store, especially one that I've never been in before, and just to look at that mix of products and think, if I were new, could I figure out what to do? If I were, if I had a few basics, would I know what to buy next? And what's always interesting is at the beginning of an edition, it always makes sense. The longer that edition goes, the harder it is. Or when you're transitioning editions, right, where you end up having like the starter set for 4E next to the starter set for 5E, it can just get so confusing. And these kind of products can contribute to that. Now, maybe given the wording in the release, maybe they've been smartly designed to say, this is a companion to this book. So, okay, well, maybe I'll buy both of these. And I think that what's interesting is Penguin Random House and a couple of these other larger distributors and publishers have found that there is, like, usually the sales for supplements are so low they're not worth doing. But if you can thread that needle and find the right thing, then they are, right? And they've seen this with fiction, right? Which is why all fiction books for D&D now come through Penguin Random House, apparently. Whether it's the Fallbacks or Strahd or any of these other books that they put out, and that some of these supplements can work, and that there are a few creators that are worth working for. And that's a really interesting thing to see in the ecosystem, because again, it could be official D&D, and instead it's these third-party products. We've also seen the huge success of things like D&D cookbooks and products like that. And so I think there's this experimentation. You and I were sent once a copy of a book that was drinks for your D&D game, right? Inspired themed drinks. And so it's always interesting to see what these companies are doing, because they have a real feel for their audience, right? That is what they do. And when they decide to do a D&D book, it means they really think this is going to work. They don't take these projects lightly. And so, and they tend to do them well. Like the Stranger Things book that was only in Target that I talked about on my channel, on my YouTube channel, is amazingly well done for what it's trying to create. And it is when I look at that book, I'm like, yeah, this is not something D&D would make, but it is great to have if you're a fan. Right. Here, we're getting into that interesting area of this is what we might have expected D&D to make, and instead someone else is making. And so we'll have to see kind of once we get our hands on this, how it compares. It's really, really fascinating.
Right. Yep. We got news about the best-selling RPGs on Fantasy Ground. Geek Native often shares lists of best-selling RPGs on various platforms, and this year they looked at Fantasy Ground. Similar surveys in the past have, have shown that D&D dominates. The top 3 books or offerings are the Monster Manual, the Player's Handbook, and the Dungeon Master's Guide. No big surprise there. What's next most popular? Dice. Dice sets.
Sure.
Okay, how about after the books and the dice? Tasha's Cauldron of Everything. Maybe very surprising given that it was a 2020 release.
Yeah.
All right, so let's take out all D&D books, Teos. Let's talk about all D&D stuff, dice, all that. Let's get to it. What other than D&D is the most popular stuff content on Fantasy Grounds?
Yeah, I thought that was really, really surprising because it's Shadowdark. And then number 2, which I never in a million years would have picked, is a Savage Worlds sci-fi supplement. And I just, what? Okay. And then slots 3 to 9 are Pathfinder 2 books and a Starfinder book. Okay, fine. And then Call of Cthulhu as the 10th product on the list when you take out all the D&D stuff and all the dice sets. And that's really interesting because, I mean, Shadowdark and Call of Cthulhu are not, minis type places. And a lot of these platforms will gravitate towards systems that, like Savage Worlds, are a little more, either you can automate things, and so the VTT is helping you out in that regard, or it uses minis and terrain to such an extent that it makes sense to move around on these systems on a virtual tabletop. So very interesting to see that despite that, Shadowdark, Call of Cthulhu doing well in this top 10, again, once you remove all the D&D sales. And I'm still fascinated by that 5-year-old Tasha's Cauldron of Everything being on that list as the next product after the Monster Manual PH and DMG, which isn't, that wild kind of given the kind of product it does, but especially that we're now in 2024 land, that is very, very interesting.
Mm-hmm. The Kansas City Chiefs are playing D&D. Sadly, they did not make the playoffs this year. Tip of the hat to Chiefs superfan Marcelo de Velasquez, the Valiant DM. But at least in their free time, they get to play D&D. The NFL team played D&D and shared their recording on their official YouTube channel. It was an hour-long game that they called Dungeons and Defense. Because looking at this list, all of the players are on the defensive side of the football. What did this video do, Teos?
I love it. I can't believe it's an hour-long recording on their official channel. I mean, that's amazing. And it says, can the Kansas City Chiefs defense retrieve the stolen orb, or will dragons, mischief, and mayhem get in their way? So it was Chris Jones, Mike Pennell, George Karlaftis, Derek Nadi, Mike Dana, and Ashton Galati. I'm sure I've murdered some of those names. Played the game. You can see how huge an NFL fan I am. DM was Anna Margaret. And she posted about that on her socials, which was cool too, and shared some videos of it. The game used Dwarven Forge terrain, and I saw that on their Discord, Dwarven Forge was saying how fun it was for them to get this fun and unusual request sort of out of the blue to like, hey, can you give us terrain for this? And so they did. They shipped off terrain to support the video that you see. I thought this was all really cool, and it's on the backs of other NFL connections. Ian World noted that Johnny Stanton IV, we talked about this for the Cleveland Browns, he used to play, and he now produces tabletop RPG content. He's been to Gen Con and places like that. And former Dallas Cowboy player Travis Frederick co-founded Demiplane, right? So some more NFL connections in there.
There you go. And we go from the halls of uh, football fame to the halls of government, where Washington Secretary of State Hobbs talked about gaming. There was an article in the Olympian discussing Washington Secretary of State Steve Hobbs, who is a big fan of D&D and RPGs. We've talked about him on the show before. Hobbs played as a child, then rediscovered the game while serving as a state senator. Hobbs now works with Wizards of the Coast to donate D&D kits to libraries, since his office oversees the Washington State Library. Hobbs sees D&D as a great way to break down barriers, and he shares in an interview how he played with a Republican state senator who asks, "Is that the devil game?"
Yes, it is. That is the devil game. Yeah, and Hobbs oversees allowing D&D, or he was in charge of this decision around allowing D&D in state prisons, which used to ban the game there. And instead, they went from unbanning it to then actually highlighting the therapeutic role that RPGs can play in prisons. The state now helps libraries receive grants to fund tabletop RPG play. One library has a grant to support resin dice making. Another helps elders make dice trays for local kids. And one thing that I thought was interesting is, politics and the way it always hits, especially in these fractured days. He received criticism for attending Spiel Essen, the world's largest board game fair in Germany, while elections were taking place, and his office is responsible for vote counting. And he defended the move because he said, "Listen, I don't actually count the votes. My office does, but not me. And I'm here with an area gaming company traveling with me to help them be at Spiel and to support Washington's multi-billion-dollar tabletop gaming sectors." I thought that was interesting that he's even had to defend his attendance of a gaming convention, just like the rest of us, Shawn.
Exactly. That's why I go to. And you out there could go to Foundry and get a job because they're hiring. On their website, the Foundry VTT announced that it is hiring a game designer and writer. This would be a full-time remote position to work with a team to, quote, create Ember, a revolutionary digital role-playing campaign setting, and Crucible, an innovative digital role-playing game system. Both of these products are designed and created exclusively for digital play on the Foundry virtual tabletop, challenging you as the designer to innovate with designs that honor TTRPG tradition while inventing new paradigms for play. Foundry currently has 8 full-time employees working on this project, as well as part-time contractors, with a link in our show notes to that employment notice. What do you think, Teos?
It's really, really cool. We've seen this with Roll20. I think the question is, it's a neat project to go through as a company. It teaches the company a lot. The designer certainly learns a lot. Jameson Turcaso helped, or really was one of the primary forces for the Roll20 RPG that was being created there. Mm-hmm. But the problem is, getting this to stick. When you already know that most of people are coming to your platform for D&D, and you are getting sales of those, are you going to succeed in marketing your own game? But it can still be worthwhile. I think that Roll20 found their way. The process of creating their RPG and supporting it almost showed them what their platform should do to support all RPGs, I think. Mm-hmm. I might be overdoing this, but in my mind, this was related. And so a worthwhile endeavor here for Foundry to create this and understand what it's like to be a publisher and creator and how your platform does or does not support that game will probably lead to a lot of innovation. So it seems like a neat idea to me.
Yeah, the first thing I thought of was Burn Bright,
Yeah.
which was the game that James and several others worked on. And yeah, it's a matter of, will people play any new game you make, regardless of whether it's digitally integrated and got all the bells and whistles, or if their focus is always going to be elsewhere. But like you said, it is a process that at least you learn from, even if it is not a raging success.
Yep. And a lot of marketing, you can't, ever track its effectiveness. So why not actually have something at the end of your marketing that you actually can show off? So, yeah.
Yep. Speaking of having something to show at the end of a long run, Mythic Games, after making millions in crowdfunding, is liquidating. It is a Luxembourg-based company. Mythic Games was one of the most successful crowdfunding board game publishers. They raised over $19 million over 5 years, including a $5.6 million payday for their Darkest Dungeon board game. Much of their crowdfunding took place during the pandemic, which brought a surge of interest, and then big increases in production costs and shipping, for which they did not account because they had no idea it was coming. It continued to launch campaigns as a way to try to make up for cost increases and losses elsewhere. And then several times they had to ask backers for more money in order to actually send them the products that they had purchased through the Kickstarter crowdfunding.
Yeah.
Ultimately, they were looked into by the Luxembourg government to review their company and their processes for deliberate criminal wrongdoing. The government of Luxembourg did not find any, but they shut down the company anyway and forced it to do compulsory liquidation after failing to publish its annual accounts.
Yeah, it's a really sad story on multiple levels, and it reminds me of a couple things that I've heard. There was another company, I don't want to mention my name, but another RPG company that shared a sort of, where we are status, and it basically was, we have done they've invested so much money into trying to make this company work, but also played this sort of shell game of crowdfunder number one. Well, that we messed up on the accounting for that. So crowdfunding 2 will certainly fix that. And you know what? Crowdfunding 3 will fix the problems with 1 and 2. That is a horrible model. And I recall this other company was talking about how the CEO was saying, or president, whatever it is, the owner was saying, they had actually sold personal lands they own to make up for this. And I'm just thinking to myself, you should have stopped the first time you failed. Now you're losing the land you could have given to your kids or something. Like you're just and you're not any better off. You still haven't delivered. You're still behind. Don't get into this. Don't ever start borrowing from the next thing to make up for what you did before. Like make up for the thing just focus on that part. And it just digs a bigger hole. And we see these types of stories. This is one of the biggest ones we've seen. I mean, this was a darling company, right, by all accounts, until you look underneath. And anytime you see these companies that release the future product to pay the previous, it's a terrible, terrible idea.
Mm-hmm. And then adjacent news to role-playing games, mass market books are leaving grocery stores. What is this about, Teos?
It's a really interesting story I heard just a couple of days ago on NPR. They interviewed publisher Esther Margolis about the end of the era of mass market paper books. And these are the inexpensively made books is really how it started, that were once staples in most grocery and drugstores. And you remember the sort of these revolving metal stands that you could kind of, carousels, you could turn them around and see these books. And when it first started, I think it was in the 1930s, it was a very, very cheap book that was being offered. And what I like, there's a beautiful point that Esther makes about how this was pay $1 and get literacy, right? And how great this made it for so many people to just have accessible literacy in this era. But also over time, what it does is help various authors make it big, because every single grocery store, every drugstore has these racks in them. And she points to Kurt Vonnegut and Stephen King as authors who, if you didn't have this system, how could they have gotten to where they did? And so, things have evolved over time. Many times she kind of says the decline began in the 80s, but even before that, you see these metal racks go away, become shelves because the books are getting bigger, more expensive. They're taking up space deliberately, so you have to showcase them. And just like we've seen the magazine racks disappear, now we see the book racks disappear. And this is where I go, okay, interesting story, but is there a parallel here for RPGs? could the profit on RPGs drop someday to where it isn't viable in a Target, in a Barnes and Noble, in a gaming store, right? These, depending on where you think, these might sound, no, that won't happen. But actually, all these questions that I really was just asking myself these questions. And then as I started to think about them, I realized they've all happened to some extent already.
Yeah.
There have been times when a number of gaming stores stopped carrying D&D or RPGs entirely and only carried, say, collectible card games like Magic especially, but even back in the heyday of all the various card games, Warhammer, models and train things and whatever. Depending on the era, there were times when they just said, role-play games aren't worth it. And then surging return of interest, and suddenly RPGs get a dedicated shelf and so on. And we're somewhere in between that era right now, but still on a pretty positive side. But there's no reason to say that it couldn't happen again, right? There are these times when Target carried 5e box sets, but not now. And those are important shifts that really impact our hobby, even more so if they should become permanent, right? And very hard to track those trends looking forward or even currently. But I found that a very interesting thing to think through. One other little bit, there's a second story that the distributor Baker and Taylor, which is one of the major distributors supplying libraries, will cease operations at the end of 2025. That was a story that came out today. And so there's also an interesting listen through NPR on that and how that impacts things. We're seeing a lot of changes in book distribution, and there is a lot that could happen that makes it not impossible to foresee an era where people aren't just walking in, name your type of store, and seeing something they might buy. And that is impactful, right?
Yeah. My daughter is going through this right now with the Baker and Taylor issue because she works at a small public library and they were waiting to get in the books that they wanted for 2026. And all of a sudden, the list of books they can offer is now greatly reduced because they couldn't get it through that distributor anymore, making it either impossible to get or so much more expensive to get that it's almost not even worth budgetarily wise getting the book. So
Oof.
it is not surprising given economic conditions, but we will have to keep an eye on how it does impact the role-playing game industry.
Okay.
Let's go to our creator corner here. Look at a couple of things. One popped up in my feed, the Moonshae Isles Rising Shadows Omnibus. So speaking of organized play campaigns, way back when Baldman Games was given the opportunity to publish an organized play campaigns based in the Moonshae Isles. I was one of the people that helped launch this campaign many years ago. It became too much work for me. Eric Mengi picked up the work and ran with it in ways that I could not have ever done or even imagined. And Savannah Houston McIntyre also was part of that effort. I wondered what would happen to these 60 plus adventures that were out there. And now I know. This bundle that they're selling on DMsGuild offers 60 adventures spanning all tiers of play, containing the complete Rising Shadows collection. So everything you need to begin your heroic journey in this renowned campaign. We're talking almost 20 trilogies of adventures.
Wow.
Plus some introductory content. If you bought all of this individually, it would be over $300 worth of content, which they are selling for $180. So if you just have an interest in lore and are interested in the Moonshae Isles, this content could help you run several full-length home campaigns just all on its own.
Yeah. Yeah, and Eric has a magic capacity for grasping a setting and its NPCs and its factions and understanding how a story can come from that feels really engrossing, really real. It feels, three-dimensional, wraps around you as a player or a GM. I love what he can do with that, and he's done it again with this campaign, and it's really amazing. And there's so much here to play. You could play several campaigns worth, and fantastic stuff.
Yep. And one more reminder that you can crack the sun. It's not too late, but time is running out. The Crack the Sun project from MCDM for Draw Steel is now over $2 million. And the crowdfunding on BackerKit ends on January 4th. So you are quickly running out of time to go to the link that's in our show notes. It's again backerkit.com. You can search Draw Steel Crack the Sun. How's it going over there, Teos, on that project?
Oh, good, good. We've been off this week for the holidays since last we talked, but I'm still excited by the last, piece of work that I read from an author and where that's going to go. Like, I'm excited to start play testing it in my home group because I'll get to do that before other people get their hands on it, and I'm very excited about that.
Nice. Well, that was our news and commentary section here on Mastering Dungeons.